Hello and welcome to my channel. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. This morning we're going to be making a card using the More Than Autumn stamp and die bundle. There are stamps and coordinating dies. Let's take a quick look at some of the dies included in the stamp set. So there are lots of little pieces that coordinate with the stamp set. There's the coffee cup and cream, but you also have words. There is a die that matches the donut. Lots of cute little pieces there to use in your creating. We're also going to be using the Brights 6x6 Designer Series paper. These are the patterns that we're using: Pumpkin Pie and Granny Apple Green. We're also going to be using the Stylish Shapes dies. We're using the Stitched Circle. There are banners and squares as well that coordinate with this die set. We have a scrap of basic white, and then we have thick basic white for our card base. It is 5.5 by 8.5, and we've scored it and folded at 4 1/4 for our card base. So I'm just going to take my bone folder and crease the edge. Let's go ahead and set the card base aside. So let's get started. We are going to do a little cutting, and then we'll get down to some stamping, and then we'll finish the card. So we're going to cut the pumpkin pie. We need a piece that is 1.5 by 3.5. So we'll line this right up on our Stampin' trimmer. And then we'll just cut to the needed dimensions. Again, 1.5 by 3.5 is the piece that we need. So we'll just cut. The remaining piece is small, but here's the piece we need. We'll set it aside. And then we're going to bring in the Granny Apple Green, and we'll cut that as well. Now, there are 2 different patterns on each side. I think we'll be using the side with the stripes, and we're going to cut it to 4 by 5 1/4. I'll save the larger piece of scrap. We may be able to use that on another card. And so we'll set these 2 pieces aside. Also, we're going to need a piece of basic white. So let's add that to our trimmer. And we need this piece to be 4 3/4 inch by 3.5. So we'll start by cutting the 3.5. That way we have a larger piece of white that we can use for other projects. And then we'll cut it to 4 3/4 inch. All right, we have what we need. So let's go ahead and put our trimmer away. And we'll get started with a little stamping. So we'll put our die cuts aside, and let's go ahead and bring in some stamps and ink. So again, we're going to use the cup and the fluffy. And then for our sentiments, we have lots to choose from. But we are going to be using Nothing's Better Than Autumn, and then we'll use the heart and the little pumpkin shape here as well. But there's lots there to choose from. Let's go ahead and grab our cup image. We'll get that mounted on a clear acrylic block. By the way, these are photopolymer stamps. That means they're clear and you can see through both the stamp and the block. So we'll put our fluffy cream on a block as well, and our little pumpkin. We'll start with these 3 stamps. Okay. So first we are going to use black memento. If you don't have this in your repertoire, this is an ink that you will use over and over again. And we'll ink up our cup and stamp it right down on our basic white. Let's cover the ink up. And then next we're going to grab the early espresso. I chose early espresso for the cream. I thought the black memento would be a little stark. So we're going to soften it a bit by using brown, and we'll stamp it with the early espresso. And we'll go ahead and close the stamp pad. I'm notorious for getting my fingers in stamp pads, especially when I leave them open, so we'll cover it right up. So the next thing we're going to do is bring in some Stampin' Blends markers. Let's go ahead and stamp our pumpkin. We're going to stamp it onto the label, and then we'll bring in some Stampin' Blends markers to do a little bit of coloring. There we go. And this is what we have. So we've added the pumpkin to the label. We'll cover our ink. And next we'll get started with the Stampin' Blends markers. So first we're going to color our pumpkin, and we will use pumpkin pie. If you're not familiar with Stampin' Blends markers, they come in sets of 2. There's a light and a dark for each color. We're using the light and dark pumpkin pie, and we're going to be starting with the darker shade. So there are 2 different tips. There's a brush tip and a rounded nib. We're going to start with the rounded nib, and I'm just coloring, tracing the lines that the stamp has made first, and then I'll go around the outside of the pumpkin with the dark pumpkin pie, and next we'll bring in the light pumpkin pie, and we'll use this for the filler. And so the rest of the pumpkin will color in. And if you notice, I am not really being careful. I'm just staying inside of the lines, and I'm dragging and filling in the entire shape with a lighter color. Next, we'll color in the label, and we're going to be using crumb cake, the dark and light crumb cake. We're going to start with the dark, and we're going to use the rounded nib. So again, I'm just going around the inside of the lines of the label. I'll do all 4 sides using the dark. By the way, Stampin' Blends are alcohol ink based, and because of that, they blend well without leaving lines. That's why they're called blends. And we're going to come right back in with the light crumb cake and the rounded nib, and we're going to fill in the remainder of the label. Once again, I am not being extra careful. I am just scribble coloring. It's the beautiful thing about blends. It makes you look good, and they're not complicated to use. The one thing that I am being careful to do, however, is so that I get the blending effect, I am running the light color over the dark lines that I made around the outside. Finally, we're going to bring in the Granny Apple Green markers. Once again, there's a light and a dark, and we're going to start with the dark and the rounded nib. And I am going to follow the lines that the stamp made, and any additional lines I'm going to fill them in as well with the dark. We'll do that at the top and the bottom of the cup shape. And like with the other two, we're going to take the lighter color and we will fill in the open space. And once again, I'm using the rounded nib because there's not a lot of space to color in, but I am being careful to drag right over the darker color as well so we get the blending effect that we're after. Okay. Here's our cup, a closer look at it. And let's go ahead and take the light crumb cake and we will just drag that over our whipped topping so that it's not stark white. And we're going to use the brush tip for this. The brush uses a lot of space, so I like to say it covers a lot more real estate more quickly. So I'm just lightly coloring in the whipped topping. I don't want it to be as dark as the label. And then we're going to grab the sprinkles. If you didn't notice, there are some sprinkles. We're going to mount them onto the clear acrylic block. Let's go ahead and put our pumpkin back. We'll add these sprinkles. And we're going to add the sprinkle to the whipped topping using early espresso. So let's open it and just add a little bit of ink to our stamp. Stamp it right down on top of the whipped topping. Close our ink up. All right. Now it's time to do a little die cutting. So we're going to bring in our mini Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. If you don't have this little die cutter, it is a nice addition to your stash. I like it because it's small enough to put in my scrapbook bag if I'm going away to do a little crafting. It's the perfect size, and most of our dies will fit through the smaller machine. So you will need both the mat marked as number 1, and then you have your 2 clear plates marked as number 2. If you'll notice, I like to do most of my cutting on one side of the plate so that when it starts to get lots of cuts in it, I'll switch to the reverse side and then finally to the other plate that doesn't have much cutting on it, because eventually you'll need to replace the plates. All right, let's go ahead and cut down our paper. I'm going to turn the die cutter around. I'm right-handed, so I need to have that crank handle on the right. So I've gotten my first plate, the plate number 1 on the bottom. We have plate number 2 on top. And then we have our stamped and colored cardstock. And then finally, we'll add our dies over the shapes. And you just need to make sure that the raised side is down, that's what's going to do the cutting, and the flat side of the die should be facing you. All right, let's go ahead and bring in our top mat. I have cut a couple of times on it, but in general, I try to do all the cutting on one mat, and it gives me a little more life, I feel. Extends the life of the mats. All right, let's go ahead and crank it through. You can use washi tape to hold your dies in place if you're not confident. Most often, I'm pretty comfortable with just holding the top and bottom plates and then cranking it through, holding the die and the cardstock in the middle. All right, and now we have our cut shapes. So we'll throw the rest of the cardstock away. We don't need that. And we'll put our dies away. I don't know if you're anything like me. You might misplace those dies if you don't put them away right away. So I like to shove them right into the sleeve as soon as I'm done using them. And that way I can keep track of them. All right, so let's bring in the rest of the components for our card. And we're going to do a little bit of stamping on that basic white mat. I think I need to cut it down a little bit. It should be 4 3/4 by 3 1/2. Oh yeah, looks like I have an extra 1/4 inch. Let's cut it down to 3 1/2. There we go. And put the Stampin' trimmer aside. Okay, that looks good. All right, so let's start by stamping. We're going to stamp Nothing's Better Than Autumn, and we're going to stamp them in 2 different colors. So we're going to start with the word autumn, and let's go ahead and mount the Nothing's Better Than as well. We'll put that on the larger block. There we go. And then we have the word autumn. So the word autumn we're going to stamp at the very bottom center of our mat. And we're going to use the pumpkin pie ink. So we're going to stamp in 2 different colors here. And I'm starting with the autumn, the word autumn in pumpkin pie, so that I am aware of the placement for the other sentiment. It's easier to start from the bottom and build up. So we're going to grab the Early Espresso again, and we'll ink up the Nothing's Better Than. And now we know how far or how closely to place it over the word autumn. Right here looks like a good spot. Here we go. And this is the result so far. All right, let's go ahead and cover up the ink. I do a lot of coloring, but I tell you, with nails and fingers like mine, messes can be made really quickly. All right, we'll put this away, and then we're going to grab that little pumpkin, or I'm sorry, we're going to use the heart first. Let's make a couple of hearts using the pumpkin pie. In the upper left corner, we're going to stamp a couple of heart shapes. There we go. And we'll put one here on the bottom next to the word pumpkin. I'm sorry, autumn. Let's go ahead and close our ink up. There we go. right, so this is what we have so far. I think my heart shapes might be a little low, but that's okay. The next thing that we're going to do is bring in the piece of pumpkin pie cardstock. Let's do that before we assemble. Yeah, let's do that before we assemble. Well, let's go ahead and put our cup on the smaller stitched die cut. There we go, and we're adhering that flat. And then next we're gonna add a little dimension to our whip topping so that it stands out a little bit. So we'll grab some Stampin' Dimensional. They're self-adhesive foam. They come in hexagon shape. I love them. One of my most utilized products. We'll add one Stampin' Dimensional. And then I'm going to use my Take Your Pick tool to remove the adhesive backing. And we will adhere this right down over our cup. There we go. Isn't that cute? That dimension does a lot for our lovely latte, which maybe we'll call pumpkin spice. I don't know. All right, let's go ahead and we're gonna adhere the larger basic white stitch die cut circle. We'll make it flat. Oh, first we need to add our designer series paper. We're going to put that right in the center here. Using the adhesive, my adhesive of choice, which is the Stampin' Seal Plus. There we go. Let's not get ahead of myself. And then next we'll go ahead and adhere the stitched circle. Again, we're going to make it flat. And right in the center, right above or on top of our pumpkin pie mat. I thought my heart shapes were a little low, but it's okay. It's plain peekaboo. And then finally, we're going to make the smaller stitched circle that is adorned with our die cuts. We're going to make that dimensional as well. So I'm using my Take Your Pick tool to remove the adhesive backing from the dimensionals. And we're going to adhere this right down in the center of the larger die cut mat. There we go. Let's move it over just a bit. I want to make sure it's right in the center. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, so we have our card base here. Just take our bone folder and crease the edge. It's going to go right in the center once we add our other layer of designer series paper. So I've decided to use the striped side. We could use either. I really like the side with the leaves, but for some reason I'm drawn to the stripes. So we're adding some Stampin' Seal Plus. And then we'll place this layer right in the center of our card front, leaving an even border around the outside. And now we can add our adorned mats right to the center of our card. So we'll add a little adhesive and let's make sure we have the opening in the right place. There we go. We'll do the same. We'll leave an even border around the outside and adhere this right to the center of our card front. And we're almost done. The last thing we're going to do is add these adhesive backed sparkle gems. I really like the goldish color. It's actually more champagne copper. I don't know. The flecks pick up the color of the pumpkin pie really nicely. So we're going to add 3 of them to the card front to finish it off. And down at the bottom, we'll add one next to the nothing's better than. And then the last thing we're going to do is grab that little pumpkin. Remember I said we're going to use the tiny pumpkin. So we used it twice. We used it as the label identifier on the front of our cup. But we're just going to grab it and make the inside of our card match the outside as well. So we're doing a little bit of coordinating. So I'm going to grab a wipe. Let's clean this up a little bit because we last stamped it with the black memento. So let's clean it up because we're going to stamp it with pumpkin pie. So we don't want to smudge it. We want it to be nice and pumpkin-y. And so we're going to grab the pumpkin pie. And we're just going to put that little pumpkin in the lower right corner of the inside of our card. There we go. We'll clean it off. And close our ink up. And here we have it. Here's our finished card. Isn't it the cutest ever? I don't know. I love this stamp set. And if you love it too, I'll have a link in the description. Thanks for watching.